Okay, so for this video, we are going to paint the first fruit, which is going to be the grapefruit. So the first thing I want to do, I want to create a base color for this grapefruit. So in this case, it's a yellow orange. And so we're really just kind of looking at the overall color of the fruit. So I will take yellow and orange and mix these thoroughly. And just a little bit more yellow. So for this base color, I'm just going to paint the entire fruit in that base. And as I paint this, I am going to curve all of my brush strokes. Since this is technically a sphere, we want to keep that overall shape and form of the fruit. Now, a lot of this color will eventually get covered up with our additional layers of paint. But with this base coat, it's really just a good practice to work in those curved brush strokes because you're really kind of training yourself and your hand to work in this direction once you start adding all your different values. And with yellow and orange, these are thinner paints, so they don't have as much weight to them as some of the darker colors like your blues and your violets. So it may come across as thin. So if you have any little stray areas of paint or pencil marks, they may not get covered up. They may kind of show through, but that's okay because we'll add multiple layers of paint and they should get covered up. So I have that base color down for my grapefruit. So now I want to paint dark to light. So in this case, I want to move from my dark shadows, which there is a fairly dark shadow right here. There's a dark shadow on the side. And then we have a darker shadow on this side. So once the base coat is down, we want to move from dark to light. Now for my dark color, what I'm wanting to do is I am going to take my complement of yellow or yellow orange. So the complement of that would be blue violet. We could also just use straight up violet and blue. And I'm going to use one of those cool colors, either blue violet or blue violet, and mix it with this base. And so what this will do, it will neutralize this base that I've created, and it'll form the ideal shadow color that we will add to the grapefruit. So I just need a little bit more of this base. And we want to mix this pretty well. Now, since this is a darker color, it's going to be very strong and it can easily overwhelm the rest of this painting. So I'm just going to put a little bit here and I'm going to leave that. And then I'm going to do a little bit on the side, a little bit right here. And then after that, I'm going to go back to my base and blend it into these shadow colors. So now I'm taking that base color, I'm blending and mixing it in with that shadow. Just remember to curve your brush strokes as you're painting. And with the temperate, it does dry fairly quick. So if it's not really blending how you want, you may just have to set down that darker color again. in order for it to blend properly. So, but this area, it looks like it has started to dry just a little too much. I'm just going to put a little bit more down and then go back to my base. And I'm going to blend this down and then I'm going to blend it back up. So I went down and then back up. And with temper painting, you're probably going to use quite a few different layers of paint. So if you're not getting it the first time, it's not a big deal. Just do it again. So I'm going to put a little bit more of this darker color at the bottom. And accidentally covered up a little of the banana, but that's okay because we haven't painted the banana yet. So once we do paint that banana, that little slip up will get covered. So the space between the banana and the red apple, where we see a little bit of that grapefruit, it's pretty small, so you may need a smaller brush or one of the smaller pointed brushes to capture that. So kind of the key takeaway here is just paint from dark to light. So we started with our dark color, we're blending it into our base coat, and then the next thing we'll do is add our highlight colors. I'm going to put a little bit right here, and we'll reblend this. So that shadow wasn't quite as dark as I was wanting. And it looks a little bit better. We'll do the same over here. So just putting a little bit of dark down, go back to my base, and then blend that into the dark value. Now, I do have kind of this odd change in color that happens up here. Not a big deal. We can go back to our base, just paint that back in. Because this area where it's lighter, that was our first coat of paint. And this is going to be the second coat of paint on top of that. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is there are two highlights in this area. There's one that's really bright, that's pretty visible, that you can see in the photo. And then there is kind of a less bright highlight that surrounds that. So for that less bright highlight, what I'm going to do, I'm going to take white, set that right here, a little bit on my base. So we're making a tint. And I'm going to put some just like this. And I'm going to wipe off that excess paint from my brush. I'm going to go back to my base color and kind of paint along the edges. And I'm simply going to blend in this brighter highlight into the rest of the grapefruit. Now I don't want this bright highlight to overtake my shadows that I did. So I'm going to wipe all the excess paint off my brush, go back to my base color, which is running out of just a little bit. So I'm taking my brush and going right on the edges of where that highlight is and blending that in to the base now. So this does take some practice. So if you're not getting it the first time, you know, it's not a big deal. Just try it again. And just remember to curve those paintbrush strokes that you're making. So now I still have my shadow colors. And now I'm ready for the really bright highlight. So for this really bright highlight, I'm going to take white and a bit of yellow, because in the photo you're seeing kind of a bright yellowish reflection. I'm going to get even more white. So I need to tint that down just a little bit. Got a little too much yellow that first time. And for this area, what I'm going to do, I'm not going to use a normal paintbrush stroke. I'm going to take my brush and just barely stipple that texture in. So I'm just barely putting my brush to the paper, and I'm stippling because this is replicating the peel or the skin of that grapefruit, which is very textured. So it has that rougher texture to it. Yeah, I'm going to put a big clump of paint right there, and I'll show you what you can do in case that happens. So the highlight starts off kind of bright and dense in the middle, and then it kind of feathers out just a little. Now, in the case that you accidentally put too much paint down, just take your brush, wipe all that excess paint away, and then I'm going to take my brush with no paint and just stipple back on top of that area that had a lot of paint where it was kind of it was like clumping, like right in the middle. And it'll break that up, but it'll still keep that texture. So in case that happens, that's all you have to do for that part. So I may go back in and just kind of touch some of that up. And then just go back and kind of lightly go over some of those areas. So right along the edge, I have my paintbrush with no paint on it. And I'm just kind of going over some of that really light yellow around the edges and kind of feather that out. So now we have that texture that is seen on the grapefruit where we have that really bright highlight that we are wanting to capture. So that way it helps create that three-dimensional look for the grapefruit. Now, another thing we can work with, we're going to add the shadow from the grapefruit on the table. So that's another key component to make it look like it has those three-dimensional properties. So for the shadow, I'm going to essentially do the same thing where I'm going to work with that neutral color. So that's where you're taking your complements and you're mixing those together to get that shadow color. So for the color I'm going to work with, we're going to, we could really use this color we already have. So again, this was a mix of violet and uh, the base color, which was that yellow orange that we were working with. So I'm going to need a pretty small brush because this is a fairly small area we're working in. And with this, so I have a pointed brush. And if you want to create a point that's even more pronounced or sharper, I've got quite a bit of paint on my brush right now. If I take my brush and just put it right here and spin it, I'll get more of a point back. And then I can go right under here. And the shadow from the grapefruit is pretty sharp. It doesn't like dissolve at all, or it doesn't kind of feather out. It's a pretty defined shadow. Now, after putting that down, it could be a lot darker. So I'm going to get more violet, mix it in with this little area that's right here. Get a little bit more. We're going to darken this up quite a bit. Go back and just going to spin my brush to get some of that excess paint off and to get my point back. And I'm going to go back over this. So right now this all looks kind of sloppy around the grapefruit. But when I go in and I paint my banana, I paint my orange, the mango, all of this will come together and it will look a lot cleaner because then the freshly painted banana will cover up some of these marks, same with the apple. So for the shadow on the grapefruit, that's really all we're working with. It's just kind of a small, slightly curved area right under the grapefruit. And again, the shadow is pretty sharp. It's a fine line between the green of the top of the box and that shadow. Now, I could probably make the shadow underneath the grapefruit a little bit darker. So I'm going to go back to my shadow color that I originally created. I still have some of that purple on my brush from this darker color. I don't want it to match entirely to this. And I'm going to put just a little bit right here. And then we're going to switch brushes again, go back to my base color. I actually had some white on there, so hopefully that doesn't mess it up too much. And we're going to blend this into that shadow color I just set down. And we're going to put a little bit more of that shadow color in. And we're going to blend that back. So with painting, especially when you're blending your colors, it's kind of a game of going back and forth until you get the desired effect. So now the shadow looks better. It's a little bit darker and it's blending into the rest of the grapefruit like I was wanting. Just kind of touch up that side. So that is how you would paint the grapefruit.